Now, I don't believe it can be understated for 1 second how many expectations were held on this one. Fans expected an appropriate, dutiful, and respectful send-off for both a beloved character and actor, a passing of the torch that would feel validated and considerate, and a villain that would offer emotional stakes and consequences with justifications for their own actions for our protagonists to earn that inevitable victory. A plot that would connect the audience with who the next protector would be, and a theme that would unite fans in the understanding that grief is expressed in a multitude of ways, but has to be confronted from a healthy perspective. This movie had quite the undertaking when it was announced, as fans didn't want to see anybody fill Chadwick's shoes, but they also didn't wish for the moniker of the Black Panther to simply fade away. Prior to this, there was consideration, time and effort put into the world building and history of Wakanda, with layers of depth added to it, an understanding of its culture and an insight into the various tribes and communities within the land, and you're even offered a sense of scale and uneasiness at times when you consider that in universe the wider public were led to believe that it was a small, unassuming section of the planet, but actually possessed the capabilities and armies to wipe out entire countries overnight. At the epicenter of it all, though, was T'Challa, a warrior, a prince, and a king. His rise to prominence in the eyes of audiences around the world came because of the grace, honor, and soul that Chadwick Boseman brought to the role, and was established as this generation's inspiration, like Spidey was for many before it. Chadwick moulded that character to his sensibilities and morals, and they felt almost belonging to each other. So to cut to a little over a year later from the biggest cinematic event in recent memory, and to be struck with the news that the world had lost its king, the question quickly arose: what was next? There was an unmistakable void now left in the MCU and our world collectively. Hollywood had lost undoubtedly one of the most competent, capable, and dedicated actors of its time, and fans had lost one of their most beloved heroes on and off screen, who was battling an illness you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy. There came an air of anxiety for what Marvel would decide to do next for such a beloved character and to honour the legacy of a role left behind by such an incredible human being. And what they chose to do was rather up for debate. They decided the legacy shouldn't be forgotten, but the role couldn't be filled by anyone else, as there simply wasn't anyone that could measure up to what the role demanded after the performances that Chadwick put into it. So they rolled ahead in the way they deemed best, however controversial it may have been, and that was to continue with the already written sequel by the time of Chadwick's passing. According to director Ryan Coogler, who'd spent several months simply rewriting T'Challa's segments, where in my opinion, if you really wished to proceed with this movie, rather than simply positioning Shuri into those moments, they should have rewritten the whole thing. Start fresh rather than working on the remnants of a script that served to present T'Challa as the heart of the movie. I truly wanted to come out of this singing its praises, as I personally loved the journey we went on with T'Challa in the first installment and all the interactions thereafter and before, as they were truly moments to be celebrated, as we were given a black-led superhero that was suitable for all ages and was admired by everyone. But this installment of Black Panther sadly left me very much on the fence. I didn't hate it by any stretch, but I certainly didn't love it either. Sadly, it comes down to a few key parts for me. Now, I want to make you very aware that this is going to be spoiler-based, but I'm not going to be going into the ins and outs of the movie or breaking it down completely, just drawing up on the larger points and likely mentioning aspects of it. And I also want to confirm that these views are not representative of anyone else's but my own. I know that shouldn't have to be said, but I wanted to cover my bases here anyway. There are elements that go into making a film that should work in tandem to create a decent piece of cinema, particularly one like this that is attempting to integrate a real-world loss. The poorly executed aspects for me are as such, and I want to get rid of the negatives so that I can tell you what I did love about this movie. The excessive use of humour that landed about as well as an episode of She-Hulk just didn't feel natural at times, and made for some rather blatant pacing issues throughout.
I'm warning you, do not take another step toward me.
See how they teach the children to treat their guests.
Who brought us beer in here?
I like it.
Comedy.
One of the biggest issues that I encountered with this movie was actually Namor. The underbaked attempts to connect the motivations between Shuri and Namor's actions, which would go on to ultimately unite them in the conclusion of the movie, just weren't compatible or comparable enough for me. Particularly as Namor killed Ramonda to make a point, after trying to recruit Wakanda, let's not forget, and in a defensive effort that would have only protected his own interests and incited war with the rest of the world. Shuri wanted to find the common ground and create peace with Namor, but his lust for vengeance on the surface dwellers, which was derived from one of his people being killed by Nakia after he kidnapped Shuri and Riri, and was even planning to kill Riri, his mother dying of old age and encountering one callous group of humanity in his youth, brought him to the conclusion that to protect his domain, most of humanity needed to be extinguished.
You guys, the fuck?
That may well be an oversimplification, but it did come across as rather drastic and rushed, especially as most of humanity would not reflect those views or values that he experienced in his youth.
Seriously, you guys? The fuck?
And admittedly, the leaders of various countries wanted to do harm with the vibranium discovered at the seabed by Talakan, but is that truly reflective of everyone and a fair motivation to come after the world's population?
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
For a rational leader in the opening moments, wanting to then go and kill a 19-year-old for one fuck-up that could have been easily scrubbed out by a simple negotiation with Wakanda and a burning desire to see parts of the world perish, I started to question whether Namor was simply naive or truly was a villain without any justification. His ends didn't justify the means as far as I'm concerned. Pacing, as I mentioned a moment ago, was about as balanced as the story of the hare versus the tortoise. When you consider we bounced from genuine emotion, where I feel it was the actors piercing through the veil between the characters and themselves for brief moments that almost brought me to tears on multiple occasions, then cut into moments like this where I was questioning whether it was supposed to be moments of levity or not because it just didn't hit.
You need to be conscious of the way that you look. Walking around here with that ash on your head.
Oh, it's funny.
Make it stop!
It all made for a rather jarring experience throughout the movie for me, and I honestly wanted to be entangled in the emotions of this, to feel the stakes and be weighed down for a bit, and feel like I'm fighting back with our heroes against the assault from Namor, both emotionally, mentally, and physically, and overcome the grief that everyone felt in this moment for losing T'Challa. Then lastly, and this may be a rather personal gripe, but the weak use of CGI in areas just made for a rather jumbled and frustrating mess, and pulled me out of moments, especially during Shuri and Namor's final confrontation, where the action was heavy and gripping, but at moments drew my eyes to things that shouldn't have mattered. Put all these gripes together, it may feel like I'm attacking this movie entirely, but trust me, I'm not. I did enjoy it, but areas like these did undermine large aspects of the movie that were particularly profound, especially the beautiful ways that we bookend this film. The first moments and final seconds carried the weight and emotion I truly wished to feel throughout the whole movie, but it just didn't stick the landing with much of it, mostly undone by the terrible humour and rather messy motivations and actions for Namor. I don't wish to prattle on much longer with regards to the negatives surrounding this movie for me, but there's one last thing I need to draw up on, and that was the character of Riri. For no other reason than simply she just wasn't a compelling enough character to engage me. When you think about her experiences in life so far that we were introduced to in the film, what do we actually have to connect with? We weren't told anything about her apart from she's good with tech, she's smart, and her dad is dead. So they're trying to draw a connective piece of tissue for her involvement in this film there, which actually feels rather disrespectful in some regards, but they kept trying and trying with her in this, and it just didn't work. And I might be in a minority in that sense that feels that way, and if you loved her character, I'm glad. But I'm not convinced that she could confidently take the reins on leading her own series, nor am I interested to see more from her. She never received an effective arc that conveyed anything important about her, or her motivations. It never gave you a reason to truly care for her. It lumbered her with hollow attempts at comedy, and let's be honest, this was just Disney demanding she be introduced in this one to draw eyes to the Disney Plus series that's coming out next year, and presumably is where we'll get the context for her then. This is not how you deliver a character, Disney. You need to set up, then pay off, not pay off, then set up. That aside though, I do want to point out the areas that I loved about this one. The opening one shot of the movie brought you straight into the heat of the moment as you quickly realised what was happening. And before you had time to compose yourself and prepare for what was about to play out, you were hit with the passing of T'Challa, and essentially received a chance to say goodbye to both him and Chadwick on screen. The beautiful Marvel Studios title montage that played out in silence dedicated to Chadwick in the beginning brought a tear out of me, and was the best way to open this movie, as I feared it would just open with a glad happy Marvel fanfare that the majority of other movies have delivered. The final moments shared with Shuri as she finally grieved for her brother was beautiful, and the post-credit scene that continued after was shocking but a brilliant setup for the future of Wakanda in the MCU that should hopefully put a lot of heat to rest, as Shuri is only a seat warmer right now. I loved the depth of loyalty we got to see with Ross when it came to defending the Wakandans throughout this, and the trust that they put in him was a nice evolution of their relationship from the first movie. Angela Bassett commanded your attention with every scene she was in, and while her death wasn't what I felt the character deserved necessarily, it kept within the confines of her morals and good nature that we've grown to understand and respect and love from Ramonda. I personally loved Winston Duke and Danai Gurira's parts in this movie. M'Baku certainly received the most chuckles from me and had a better sense of heart in this one compared to the last, as he truly grew to respect T'Challa and I think even love him in a brotherly way. But Okoye was a close second, except for this scene of course, as she exploded with emotion in this, with a sense of duty and loyalty to the throne and her undying love for the Wakandan royals. The drama brought about with Okoye was decent enough, though the payoff felt a little rushed, and that suit she received at the end looked rather ridiculous for me. However faithful it may be to the comics, but I guess offers a fair idea of that rumoured Okoye series and where it could likely be headed. But it just didn't translate too well on screen for me, and that goes for Ironheart's suit as well, that honestly made the Power Rangers look intimidating. The final part that really hits home for me is the inclusion of Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger once more, that gave an intense scene of emotion and truth with hard-hitting, ferocious lines of dialogue that were delivered powerfully and with insights to Shuri, as she stated earlier in the film that she wanted to burn it all down around her, which would have connected her with Killmonger in the ancestral plane, who shared that sentiment with her when he was alive. And she never truly believed in the idea of the afterlife, as she's a woman of science. Everything is based on logic for her. It was only by letting go of her hatred, anger, and fear that she would connect with her mother in the final moments of the film. Truly beautiful writing and a solid reminder of how the Black Panther should be. Honourable, merciful, and caring. The underlying theme of this movie is without a doubt grief, and how you choose to deal with it and approach it, which has pretty much become the heart of a majority of the MCU Phase 4 titles thus far, with WandaVision, Shang-Chi, Eternals, No Way Home, Love and Thunder, and now Wakanda Forever all handling the concept of grief and loss. Sadly, however, only 2 of them actually got it right. This got you to feel everything, and may result as one of the most divisive movies to come out of Phase 4, as everyone I've spoken to so far has come out of this with a different understanding and a different perspective on it and feelings as to how it should have played out and been dealt with. But for me, this truly was a mixed bag. It had legitimately intense, moving, graceful moments that reminded you exactly what this movie was trying to do and is about, but then it would endeavour to distract you with weak attempts at humour, and I personally could have done with less of that, as it weakened those powerful moments for a quick flurry of grins. I think with how Phase 4 has played out, this was as strong as we could have gotten, and maybe some of the responses might have been better had She-Hulk not stripped out all the remaining integrity and respect the MCU possessed. to ultimately pursue a virtue signaling based MCU that is more concerned with real world politics than entertaining audiences. That said, I personally didn't mind this entry, and there are more faults to it, but I just don't believe are worth mentioning here, as it did already have a difficult task, and while I don't feel it did it perfectly, it was far from a flop, and one of the stronger entries in Phase 4. Coming out the back of this, I think they did enough for Chadwick, and I'm excited to see where they go next with Wakanda, as the legacy of T'Challa will continue and become a beacon of inspiration for many generations to come, both in-universe and outside of it. I don't think it holds up to its predecessor, and a large factor of that, if I'm honest, is the loss of Chadwick, but it was decent enough as an addition to the MCU, though I do feel it could have been presented far stronger in terms of writing, character development, and for fuck's sake, the bloody humour. As to whether I would recommend this or not, sure. I don't believe it has an easy rewatchable factor to it, but it did enough to be competent in my eyes, and you'll certainly enjoy what you see if you don't read too hard into it. That's going to do it from me though. Thank you so much for stopping by, and if you like this, please hit the like button as it helps things out a lot. Drop a comment letting me know what you thought of Wakanda Forever down below, please be respectful in the comments, and subscribe for more content down the line. For now though, take care, and I'll see you next time.